Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of the day. I appreciate everybody joining us. I know that there's probably still some folks out there eating ice cream. I didn't get any, so I might have to sneak out. But our last presentation is from John Jameson and Kat McCovey. So talking about project commitment tracking and avoidance and minimization measures that we've taken on projects and tracking of those. So at the end, we'll have time for questions, and we appreciate everybody coming. So I'm going to turn it over. I think, John, you're going first, or y'all?
Yep,
Okay.
I'm going to start. Oh, wow, that mic is on. All right. Read quickly.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with that. I didn't do that.
So we're going to talk about special commitments. What is a special project commitment? Anybody want to take a guess at a definition? Nobody?
It's not on our standard operating procedure.
There you go. Caitlin gets a prize. All right. All right. To start, a special commitment must be specific to the project. Big surprise there, right? Have a very tangible action that we need to take as an agency. Identify why and to whom we're making that commitment. Let's be specific here, people, right? We don't want to just be vague in what we might be doing. So we want to talk about that stakeholder that we're planning on taking an action on behalf of or working with, whatever it may be. We want to make sure we're identifying who is responsible for making sure we fulfill that commitment, right? So if Chad Coggins, the division environmental lead in 4, has to do something in particular, we want to identify that and make sure it's fairly clear. Maybe not name Chad by name, but his role, right? Specify what phase of the commitment is going to be fulfilled. Is it going to be in design? Is it going to be in construction? What are we talking about there? And of course, for all those who have seen them, we're going to put it on a green piece of paper, right? Green PDF now, but it's going to have that nice green background, so we're reminded this is something special we're doing. So what is a standard procedure? And I'm only saying this to differentiate between the two here. Standard procedure is going to guide our design and construction activities. It's going to help facilitate something in particular that we're doing with the design or construction work. There is a difference. Standard procedure is not a special project commitment, right? We're not going to just list out the standard procedures we're taking on a project on our list of commitments. The commitments are going to be something unique to that project. So, quick pop quiz. I'll call on a few people just for fun, right, Kat?
Feel
I
free.
mean, small audience, we know most of you. We can do that. So, project engineer will alert EMS that the project is beginning construction. Good answers. Thank you. Absolutely. So there you go. Falls in the right column. Number 2, DOT will conduct threatened and endangered species surveys prior to construction. All right. I like it. So far, 2 for 2. Number 3, DOT will conduct gray bat surveys throughout construction of the project. What do you think? You're a little bit of both. All right. That's fair. That's just specific enough that we'll put it in the commitment category. Maybe it could have been a little better worded, but
What do you want from me, John?
we're we're giving good examples here. All right. Number 4, DOT will attempt to avoid and minimize impacts to streams and wetlands to the greatest extent practicable during final design. Standard, that's right. That's basically a regulatory requirement for us. Number 5. You don't have to read all of that. You can probably tell from the first line.
Read it. Read all of it.
The project's going to impact a VAD property. That's a voluntary agriculture district. If right-of-way will be acquired from the VAD through eminent domain, the Randolph County VAD ordinance requires that we do this. Yeah, there's a lot of details there, right? What do you think? Commitment, there you go. These people already know all the answers.
I know.
Kat.
Why are they even here?
I don't know.
Oh,
There you
thanks.
go. Thank you.
We appreciate you showing up.
Thanks for the
We do.
affirmation. All right, so good job on that, y'all. So special commitments. Now that we've established what a commitment is versus a standard procedure, there's the old way of capturing commitments and a new way. So just to spell this out a little bit, the old way, back in the 90s, we're still doing it the same way, but from the 90s. We decided we were going to write down commitments on a green piece of paper in a Word document and keep track of them that way. And they'd be attached to, a environmental document. They'd be attached to a permit application, and that's about it. Maybe it gets handed off to the contractor, maybe not. Hopefully it gets handed at least to the Division of Environmental people so that they can keep track of it in the field. But that's the way we did things. And generally it kind of worked, but not always. We're not always great at following up and actually fulfilling those commitments. Oh, I think I hit the wrong button there. But sometimes we would, and sometimes we wouldn't. Generally, with exceptions, it often seemed that the commitments kind of fell into a black hole. Obviously, it's a communication issue in some cases as well. Lots of star pictures here, sorry. So the new way. So with integrated project delivery, we decided we're going to kind of look at this process again, see what we can do differently, see if we can do anything better, and just make things a little bit easier. We're all balancing a lot of projects. Hopefully we can find some new ways. So with some help from DIT, we came up with a new way. We created a project commitments dashboard, and it's a living document to capture the commitments. It makes sure that that we're doing something the department's willing to commit to, and that we're fulfilling throughout the project life cycle what those commitments are. And we still have the green sheet still there as an option for sure. And let's see here. One more slide and I'm going to pass it over to Kat. So who is responsible for keeping track of commitments? Any guesses from the audience? Project manager, good answer. Project team, that's another good answer. Everybody, thank you, Arnie. Very good answers. I agree. The whole team, everybody on the team's responsible for it, right? Now, ultimately, commitments kind of affect scope, schedule, budget. So the project manager, yes, is very much responsible. But everybody's responsible for keeping track of them, communicating them to one another, and making sure that they're fulfilled ultimately. So with this commitment dashboard, you can assign duties as appropriate to various members of the team. And with that, passing it to Kat, right?
All right, so this is our new, brand spanking new almost, project commitment dashboard. You start off and it looks kind of like this. It's nice and blank, much like my face on occasion. So you're gonna click on the new commitment button and a form is gonna pop up. And there are three really important pieces to this form: the project title, project commitment, and the stakeholder. Those are outlined in red. They must be completed as part of this form. Okay? So obviously, title of your commitment, what the tangible action or feature is to be provided, very specific here, and the stakeholder. To whom are you making this commitment? Why are we doing this? So those are very specific, and the first two will be shown on the green sheet as it says. So the others are really helpful as a project moves forward in development. So the commitment reason, why are we making this commitment? What's the reason? So perhaps if you have, a historic architecture effects meeting and you had commitments that came out of that, you can just simply attach or copy and paste the URL that comes from SharePoint into that box, so you know why you're doing it. Okay? If there was a meeting summary, commitment, a memo, anything of that nature, you can add it to that commitment reason so that should you perhaps go somewhere else, leave, go on vacation, somebody has a question, there's a record of why and a path to follow. Commitment type, this is a drop-down box. It defaults to one-time or recurring commitments. So there are some commitments that kind of get completed every year, so on an annual basis. Those are recurring commitments. That's what you would click in the drop-down box. Stakeholder, who is it? Who's it going to? Is it Fish and Wildlife? Is it Renee with Chapeau? Is it, the county commissioners? Stakeholder emails. This is so that if the next person who comes along needs to get in touch with that person, hopefully they can, or whoever their successor might be. This form does not send out emails, okay? So just by entering the email, it's simply there for informational purposes only, okay? Phase, there are 3 phases: development and design, construction, and post-construction. This is important when we get to the next steps. So you remember that big, long VAD commitment? The one in the pop quiz? Yeah, nod, yes, okay. So that big, long VAD commitment is brought to you courtesy of public involvement. That is standardized language. There are certain commitments that may or may not happen on a lot of different projects. You'll notice that most of these are regulatory in nature. So we commit to them, a project meets a certain standard, therefore we do them. So they have standardized language, which is in the guidance that is or will be posted on the EPU website to go with this. We'll make sure you can find it so you can use it, because that would be helpful. Most of these, again, are policies that we follow. Noise is just special as always. All right, so getting further down, okay, we've already talked about stakeholders, stakeholder email, phase, and the 2 biggest, newest, awesome parts of the project commitments are validation and commitment fulfillment. So these are the brand new groups. You can click on Add a Validation Group, and you get the validation form. So this is where you get to assign who's responsible for approving at NCDOT that this is a commitment that NCDOT wants to agree to or make. Okay? So there are quite a few disciplines listed. There is also an other. So we have all kind of the common ones. Pretty much all of EAU is on there. Hydraulics is on there. Don't worry, Andy. We got you. There is an other option that will require you to put in what discipline that is. You would assign a person to validate it. Again, you're going to put in the name and the email. This form will not send an email to that person. That is on whoever is putting this commitment in to say, hey, I have this, this commitment. I need you to make sure that it's something we're willing to do. So That's a follow-up that is your responsibility. And then the validation due date. Generally speaking, you should get these, validated within about 2 weeks. And once you click all of those forms, you click Add Commitment at the bottom, and away you go. Now, there's a funny little checkbox here that says, check here if you want to validate the commitment now. That only gets used by permitting specialists. So when they get the permit, the 404, 401 permits back with those permit conditions, that's really what that box is for, so that they can just go through and say, yep, we've already agreed to all of this. We just check that box and we keep on keeping on. Okay? Oops. Oh, I don't know what happened there. So the next one, it's just the same. It says add fulfillment. It's almost exactly identical to the validation group. It's the fulfillment form. You fill it out the exact same way. And you just go through it, pick your discipline, person assigned to fulfill, and when's the due date? Well, if it's in construction, how in the world are you going to know? Personally, I would just add the let date and then go back. These are not set in stone. They can be changed. If the person you assign to validate is not actually the person who's got the authority to validate it, then you can change that. It's okay. Okay? So we have new commitment, and then we have validation tracking. So once you enter your new commitment, it will pop up. You hit the button, and then you hit edit. Yet another form pops up. Maybe one day. There we go. And it says edit validation decision. Now, it looks a little bit better than this. All of the form fields are actually populated. We got that fixed. But the validation decision is pretty simple. It is valid or it is not valid. You need to select one or the other. If you select is valid, save will come up, and you hit save and you move on. If you decide it is not valid, then you must enter a comment. It will not let you save until you've entered a comment into that field. Basically, you got to give a reason why. All right, so we've got a commitment, we've validated it, and now we're on to fulfillment tracking. So, fulfillment tracking, we've got two different types, one time, and then I believe we have one that's recurring. Okay? So once again, just like validation, you hit the edit button, form field pops up. We tried to make this really simple. Enter when that happened, and you have to explain how it got fulfilled. So, added fancy guardrail to project on X date, done. Conducted species surveys, provided report to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on Y date, done. So you must enter a reason or how you fulfilled it. Hit save. Now, those recurring commitments will come back again and again and again. And what happens is you enter the commitment, you hit save, you'll get another chance, it'll come back up, you'll hit the edit button, you'll hit it do it again for another year, and another year. And then when it's at the final fulfillment, you hit that little checkbox, and you're finally done. And you hit save, do a little happy dance because you don't have to do it anymore, and you move on. Finally, that moment you've all been waiting for, where are my green sheets? Last but not least, we said.
Oh,
Hey, I forgot that one. Sorry, John. He told me I should take all those out, and I didn't. Last but not least, we do have green sheets. Ooh, Fun things about green sheets. We have some slider buttons that will allow you to select specific commitments, ones that will allow you to select all of the commitments that are on your project. Another slider button says ones that are fulfilled, so those would be listed on your green sheet. If you don't want those on your green sheet, you turn them all off. Display green background on the PDF is automatically turned off, so you can print this. So if you're only doing PDFs, you must remember to turn that on. That may change if we only move to, if we switch it and we have more PDFs than we have printed documents, but that's a future decision. You have a whole giant list of instructions on how to modify the green spaces down here. And it tells you just what to do. You click Generate PDF, and it will provide you with a PDF of all of your commitments to date.
However, the green sheet
Oh,
already
dang it.
told us.
Are you awake still? No? All right, so if this makes you really happy
This so
or kind of worried,
or scratch.
I don't know what happened.
I don't either.
Me either.
It's okay.
We have guidance. There will be how-to videos, kind of like YouTube and how do I do this. We'll put those out. There's an email.
There's Skype.
Those were not on there. I don't understand. All right. So if you have any questions, email epu@ncdot.gov, and John will be happy to answer every question you have.
And Mike Sanderson and others. It's not just me, but yeah. So a couple of things just to add to everything that Kat spelled out. So thank you very much, Kat. So Kat with HNTB worked a lot on this with our IT folks to help get it developed and give it a nice consultant perspective as well, which was great. The commitment dashboard, the traditional green sheets are just really mostly environmental commitments along the way. But if a project manager really wants to use the commitment dashboard to help them track other things that they're trying to keep track of along the way that they've committed to with, community, municipality, if they are dealing with a sidewalk issue or something like that, they can add that in there in the commitment dashboard to help themselves keep track of it. And they have that option. It doesn't have to go on the green sheet. It could just be on the dashboard for their use only. And it doesn't have to be on the actual green sheet that gets sent out with the environmental document and permits and such. So there's options with it. It doesn't have to be used in a certain way necessarily. Just wanted to point that out. But I think that's it for the commitment part. Any particular questions or anything? And we do have a second part. We're going to go into avoidance minimization. Yeah, Brian?
Should this be used for locally administered projects as well?
So this is based in our Connect SharePoint world. So some locally administered projects do reside in that world, but some don't. So it's based on that. If it's not in Connect, then it's not going to have access to this necessarily. But certainly if there's a benefit to having it in Connect, I think that's certainly an option. Some divisions are operating in Connect and some aren't. Yeah, Martha?
That gets to the question that I had at the beginning of this. You popped up your dashboard. How do we find that dashboard? Where is it? So when you go into your project on SharePoint, Connect, whatever you want to call it, that column on the left-hand side, okay, there's kind of a header that says Project Tools. It's in that list. Okay. There with submittal tracker, project commitments, and avoidance and minimization, and something else that I don't ever use.
Yeah. The funny thing is that link has been there all along, and nobody's used it over the years. It's something that IT created probably 10 years ago when we went to the whole SharePoint Connect system, and it was just essentially like a static tracking database that nobody ever touched. So we took that old link and revamped it with this. Andy?
On your slide that was labeled, I think, special project commitments with standardized language, I thought I saw one of them that I would have interpreted as a regulatory requirement, like, I think it said FEMA, floodplain impacts or something like that.
Yep, that's the one that you asked for.
Yeah, so we asked them.
You asked for that.
Okay.
I'll send you the whole email string if you want it.
But what is that, you know, I also saw on the slide, the old way, something about riparian buffer protection or something. I would have interpreted that as a standard commitment too. Is there a process where y'all are kind of reviewing these to see if people are fluffing up the green sheets, if you will, to make it look good, or keep following sort of the standard, you know, that procedure? I really like the start of your presentation. I thought that was excellent.
So the guidance that we're coming out with does spell some of that out, and the issue is going to be it's going to be a process. We've gotten, I'll say, I don't want to use the term lazy because that's just seems derogatory, but we've kind of thrown a lot of things into the green sheet over the years because nobody was clear on whether it should be there or not. So to be safe, you throw it in there, like the EMS example, and every construction staff person out there contacts EMS before we actually go to construction on a project. There's no reason they need to be reminded. And to some of them, they see that as somebody looking over their shoulder, checking to make sure they're doing their job, and they don't need that extra step necessarily. So we want to be cognizant of that and try to limit some of that. So we're going to spell some of that out, and we're also going to be willing to let this morph a little bit over the years as well and update it. It's a good point. Ron?
Since it's on SharePoint and you set alerts on your, like you go into the project, 2 great sheets, you set alerts so that you can see changes or things that have been added.
Ooh, that's a good question. Is there anybody from IT that Caitlin wants to answer that?
My understanding is that is set up as a list, and my understanding is that for a list, you can set up an alert specific to that list. If you were in the IT presentation earlier, go to the project commitment tracker you're trying to set an alert for, go to the file button up top, alert me underneath of that, and that should get you there. If you get there and that's not right, ECM help desk is the place to go, and they'll be able to get you straight on that.
But that's something we can add to our guidance, Ron. That's a really good point. Thank you.
Yeah, we wanted that auto send of emails and all that sort of stuff, but we kept it simple-ish.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. The problem with the emails is that with people coming and going and changing, we'd have to put practically all of DOT into a drop-down box, and that got real painful really quick.
Second question.
Uh-huh.
Great sheets, they're developed so they can go inside the plan document at some point. Let's develop another one. You get all these things, and hopefully you've got all your commitments that's going to be on the document. You generate that PDF, you stick it in your whatever.
Mm-hmm.
To make up others.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
here is to track those originally with the original document, but you need to have amendments to all the construction.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Follow up and check those things up.
Yes. Yeah, this is very much, so the green sheets have always been mostly a living document, but it was just sort of snapshots in time along the way. And so that Word document got updated, but one of the issues, the reasons we kind of pushed this direction was nobody knew what the latest version of that Word document was, where it sat, who had it, who updated it last. It was just kind of floating out there in the ether. And maybe if Amy Eulis is the lead on it in Division 9, she knows exactly where that Word document is. But for some of the central projects, it may be updated by, umpteen different people over the past 2 years in, Project Store, on somebody's hard drive, and wherever. So this is one central place where everybody knows they can go to get the latest list, hopefully. Chad, I think you're next.
Yes, my question would be about integration from a standpoint of computing, right? So if I assign a project commitment to construction staff, is there a way to notify them or to ping them, at the beginning of construction and at the end of construction that they need to go
to this site to, show that project has been fulfilled? Is there a way to integrate that with ICAMs or whatever they're using to make that commitment fulfilled? Because the DEO or the DA engineer or project manager should be cradle to grave, but they may not truly be cradle to grave. They won't see that commitment all the way through.
Right. And so it really came to light to us about, let's say, 2 months ago, that the construction side of the house was really keen on making good use of this on the construction end to help with that validation purpose. So, we certainly wanted that all along, but now they've kind of taken it and adopted it. So we're trying to figure out how that guidance should really be written to help them with that fulfillment side of things. And whether that is something that's integrated somehow with HiCams, or if it's just on the SharePoint world on the construction side for their construction site in SharePoint. We're not sure exactly how that's going to play out, but we are working with IT to figure that out right now.
And I will say that I would hope that if you assign somebody to fulfill it, that you tell them that they're assigned to fulfill it. I mean,
Early on,
yeah.
Right.
maybe 5 years later, when it gets fulfilled,
Oh, I know.
they
Yeah.
may not have it on their to-do list versus a notification through
Sure.
ICAMs as they close out or something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Zahid?
So, just to understand now, for the CE or documents, the green sheet would be not part of it, or it's going to be a separate place, right?
So it will still be attached to the CE or MCDC. Yeah, so at this point, most every CE, MCDC, EA, ONFONSI, whatever it may be, is traditionally a PDF at the end of its life as it gets finalized. So this can be PDF'd and attached, integrated into that PDF of the document. Yeah.
This would be a separate live document, and we practically our PDF.
Yeah, so for instance, in our CE templates that we have, the draft templates where you start from for a type 1 CE, for instance, we may go into those here shortly and update that green sheet template that's in there for that one page and say, see commitment dashboard for printing out your green sheet PDF. We haven't done that yet, but we probably will shortly once the guidance is out there and people start making use of this. Yeah, Jacqueline?
I guess I wanted to add to kind of that question. I mean, is that the intent of this tool, is to push everybody to be using this tool in the future? And then this is going to be essentially a requirement from now on, is to put everything in this system so that everybody knows some project in their stuff like their project.
Yes, that's the long-term intent from everything that I've been told from above our heads. So with the construction thing that I mentioned, from what I understand, the chief's office is interested in this being more of a requirement than an optional tool. So we're leaning toward that direction, trying to figure out how that's going to be rolled out and implemented. Certainly we didn't want to require it yet because we hadn't trained anybody on it yet. But yeah, we're trending that direction right now. So that's ultimately the plan. Now, how exactly it gets used by each individual project manager and DEO and everything else, we're going to work through that. And we certainly want to keep this flexible for everybody as much as possible and make it work for everybody.
I have a second question.
Sure.
A follow-up on Chad's question. For the fulfillment stage, say, during the, I guess, pre-construction phase, planning design, you don't necessarily know, we have lots of project commitments that we assign to the division for construction. And usually it's a blanket division, or that whatever will be the person. If we don't know those types of contacts, is there like a way to generically assign that to the division? Are we supposed to be narrowing down who we can assign that to, maybe the DEO or somebody? Same with other units as well, I guess.
So I think the way we've got it currently for that validation and fulfillment, I believe, I think we have broken down by like division construction and division environmental. And we may have one other grouping in there for division.
Construction, division, and project management generally, whether it's division, PMU, or SMU.
Right. So we've got some small breakdown there, but I think the question really is the person that's deriving the commitment originally should pick up the phone and call somebody in the division and say, hey, who should I be putting this down? Should I be, if it's Division 4, should I be putting Chad Coggins? Should I be putting a project manager? Should I be putting the division engineer? Who's really the decision maker to whether it's to fulfill or to validate that commitment? Amy?
I thought you were ignoring me, John.
No.
One of the examples that I think I followed already, was about a neighbor PC survey with needing to go in and do that every time you need to do a PC survey. And that's not a green sheet, that's really not a project commitment, that's really just, that's what we do.
Right.
So, I would take to have to maintain that within the project commitment as well as keeping up with it in general. For things that are very standard and very important.
So that particular commitment came from the I-4400, I-4700 project, where it's like you have to do, the Fish and BO stated that, species studies have to be done throughout construction and then for like 3 years afterwards. That's really what that commitment is. It's just really hard to get it all in a slide. So that intention was very much a very specific from the BO.
Okay, so kind of just, that makes sense, and I'm glad we're not being asked to do that. But, so for things that are not green sheet commitments, but are project commitments, what is the intent with the tracking of those? Because that has the potential to add a lot of extra stuff that we
Right.
currently aren't required to do. I mean, we do it, we all do it, but it's not a requirement, and if it becomes a requirement, it becomes an expectation, especially for the agencies that can go in and look at this information, right? That is just, that would be, I think, personally.
And that's, so literally there's a checkbox in there for whether this is a green sheet commitment or just a general commitment. And the intent really is for the project manager to have some discretion there. If they want to micromanage their commitments list for their particular project, I think that's up to us as a team to work with that project manager and figure out the best way to do that. If the PM, has 20 commitments that they want to keep track of in there, but they're not green sheet commitments, that should sort of be up to them to some extent. And, for us as a team working with them to influence that as needed to make sure that they're not overburdening everybody else with that process. So I think there's some little bit of give and take in that world, hopefully. But I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah. Yes, Andy.
Maybe to kind of build on what she was saying might there be another way of alerting people that these obligations, these standard procedures are in place in this geographic area? And, for example, DEQ is going to be starting a rulemaking process in High Rock Lake that's likely going to affect a lot of projects, but historically those rules have not been in place and people won't know much about them.
Mm-hmm.
Could there be a screening tool or something like that to help alert the engineer that that's the case? I mean, I suspect, like Hydro asked to put the FEMA stuff in the green sheets because we weren't getting consistent compliance with those regulations.
Right.
And that's sort of a crutch, really. That's probably not the best solution in the long run, to have it in the environmental document, as Amy was saying. So I wonder if we might want to just think about that a little bit more.
And I think we have had some conversations along those lines, and you're certainly thinking along the same lines as those that have been in those discussions. And certainly I think part of the interest in the long run is making use of the GIS capabilities of Atlas probably to help us with some of that spatial differentiation between projects and data. We haven't gotten far enough to really know how we might can use commitments in that regard, but I think there's an interest maybe at some point to be able to draw something on a map and say, oh, what are all our, what are the division's commitments in this particular county that we have outstanding currently. There may be something along those lines that happens eventually where we can finagle the IT world to make that happen, but we haven't gotten there yet. If there's no other questions, we'll jump into avoidance minimization.
But first,
Oh,
so as you use this and you get consultants to use this and your friends to use this and everybody starts using project commitments, hopefully it will become like a thing that we all have to do. That is the intent. As you break it, as I have for the last year, let us know. Because we don't know it's broken until somebody tells us unless we do it ourselves. So this is in kind of a work in progress, much like the PDN, much like everything IPD. We're rolling this out. We got it pretty good. Is it perfect? Heck no. So definitely when you have questions, send them in. And we'll do what we can to talk about it and get it fixed.
all right. Thank you, Kat. So going to jump into this. There's only a few slides here, and this should be fairly quick. But avoidance minimization. So what is it and why do we bother, right? Well, for those of us in the room who have had to apply for permits from our regulatory agencies and get their decisions, you know the answer already. Chad knows exactly why we do avoidance minimization because he has to deal with the Corps all the time on 404 permitting. But for those of us that don't, we want to be able to tell the story along the way, and certainly as we go to apply for permits and regulatory decisions about our project. So that's where avoidance and minimization tracking essentially comes in. So on every project that involves any kind of regulatory decision, we better be avoiding, minimizing, and ultimately mitigating for whatever effects we're having, right? And so some of those regulatory decisions I'm talking about, 404 permits, nationwide permit, whatever it may be, we've got requirements, and the agencies have requirements to look over our shoulder and make sure we're doing it. Same goes for Section 106 when we're dealing with cultural resources issues and endangered species issues, 4F through federal highway. So we want to be mindful of all that along the way. In the past, we've kind of relied on meeting notes, emails, handwritten notes about little decisions we made along the way to avoid this house, to minimize our impacts to this church parking lot, whatever it may be. This is a slightly more formalized way to be able to do this. We kept this very simple. So instead of asking, do I need to keep track of avoidance minimization measures for my project, we should instead be asking, does my project need a permit? Does it need a regulatory action? If the answer is yes, or maybe for that matter, then we should be making note of our measures that we've taken along the way to avoid and minimize. So what are avoidance minimization measures? Well, as I mentioned, some of them are obvious. Some are just engineering judgment that we make along the way. And others are dictated by a condition on, a permit, a programmatic agreement that we have with a particular agency, a commitment like we talked about with agencies or a stakeholder. It just depends. I like the graphic on the left where we worked around the tree. Literally, we've worked around a particular tree on a project before, trust me. So with that, I'm going to let Kat give us a preview of what this tool looks like.
All right, which fancy button do I hit to get the link?
Somebody asked a question earlier. There you go, Kat.
Yeah, that's what I was after. So if you're on your regular SharePoint, project page, you get pre-con tools is what it's called. You get pay items and quantities. I'm sure that's important to somebody, just not me. And then the next one up is project commitments. Then you have the submittal tracker. I think she talked about that this morning. And then this next one is the avoidance and minimization tracker. So that's how you get to it. Click on the avoidance and minimization tracker, and it looks a heck of a lot like the project commitments dashboard, but it's a lot simpler. So you would, nope, I keep hitting the wrong button. Go to add new item, and you get this form. This is it. This is how simple it is. Fill out the description of what you did, where it is in your project, if you happen to know, specific structure numbers, station numbering, it's on a plan set, wherever it is, even if it's just kind of a spatially, 100 feet south of this Y line, use that so that we can find it in the future. Hit save. Then it adds all of this information, and it's a list form again. So what you can do is there is an edit button right here. So if you have more information, this or something else, this form pops up in that list, and you get 2 more items, status and notes. Status is going to default to active. You can say obsolete. So if for some reason you can no longer do it, then you write obsolete. And I would highly recommend writing some notes in as to why you can no longer avoid or minimize because somebody's going to ask at some point. I don't know about your memory, but mine's awful. So also, you can use the notes section just to say, here's the meeting summary, and it's attached here, and this is where we discussed it. Or, I'm an engineer, and I looked at it, and I realized that if I shifted 10 feet this way, it works out better for the alignment, and we avoid hitting this front property, which may have a septic tank. And those are really expensive to move. So hit save. And off you go. If you hit this little square, red square, all of your notes pop up there so you can see any notes. It is a static, so it just shows you what the notes are. It doesn't actually let you input from that point. You have the options to export to a PDF or to Excel. Mostly it's just a tracking device. That's the create date, change date, originator, and all of that information is simply there so you know who to track down, and if you need to know who put it in there in the first place and why, hopefully they make good notes. That way you can remember or figure it out. Yay! And questions on the avoidance and minimization tracker for John. All questions that way.
Told you it was simple.
I'm going to hand out candy because our candy thrower is just awful.
Yes.
Along the side in pre-construction, you get the commitment factor and minimization. If you happen to be in the Atlas Workbench, there's some units that have added prompting questions that as you're finalizing this document, please make sure you're tracking your project commitments if you committed to anything as part of that work. There's a button in there that will guide you to the tracker without you having to click through it. So notice that button's there, and then come March, there should be the same button, just jump deep dive in, if you will, to the avoidance minimization without needing to click dashboard and then in and in and in. So just FYI, those buttons should, commitments is there, avoidance minimization should be there, because that just went live, I guess, last week.
Yep.
So,
I missed the very first part of what you said, but you're talking about the Atlas Workbench relates to that?
button
Yes.
to get to commitments tracker, if you happen to be working there and not in Connect at the time, you can get there.
Yep. The intent is to make it really super easy for people to bounce back and forth there and find what they're looking for. Keep related information close to its neighbors. Yes, Adam.
That last column there, it was put to active. As far as tracking what is the toggle and at what point does it switch? Is it
It's active or obsolete. So if you, for whatever reason, no longer your avoidance minimization measure doesn't apply, you can't do it for whatever reason, that's where you would go back into that form on the edit button and hit obsolete, and it would change it to obsolete.
Yep. Nice and simple. Yeah, Andy?
What advice do you have to offer in terms of what avoidance and minimization measure is significant enough to warrant being recorded in this?
All
Some
of
are
them.
kind of minor, and some of them are more major.
So, I don't recall, have most of y'all, or maybe not, have you seen the avoidance minimization guidance that came out a few years ago from, I think, Carla Dagnino and others in the Environmental Coordination Permitting wrote it up. So that guidance is out there. We're going to revisit that guidance to just update it a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of a 2 or 3 pages of text and then a little bit of guidance about how to write this stuff out. So we're going to revisit that and update it slightly just to spell out exactly what you're talking about, sort of the differentiation between what rises to the level of needing to be there and not. The impetus for all this was really permitting. Anybody who's written a permit application for the Corps knows that, depending on who your Corps project manager is, they may need a paragraph and they may need 3 pages of avoidance minimization measures for a project to explain, what the story of these impacts are. So we're trying to help tell that story here, but also we want to give ourselves tools for how we made other decisions. I mentioned up front, if you go out for a field scoping meeting at the beginning of a project and the division engineer is there and says, that's an important church to, this county commissioner, at all costs, we're going to miss that church. Because if we touch the church and have to buy it, then this project's dead. We want to make note of that, carry that forward through the project. Things along those lines as well. The human environment's still important as well. It's not just about permitting, it's also all the other impacts along the way.
But if you're in doubt, what should you do?
In
Write it
doubt,
down.
I would say probably add it and let somebody else delete it if they choose to. And it's a team game. We want to all work together on this kind of thing. One of the things we want to avoid is that, when we hand it to the permitting specialist at the end of the project before we go to construction and say, here, get us a permit from the Corps, that they're not totally in the dark on what we did along the way. Also, we don't want to dump on them 80,000 things that they have to filter through and figure out what's important and what's not. So it's somewhere in between. Questions? Steve Brown's been quiet in the back of the room. I'm surprised. Nothing, Steve?
Very complete presentation.
Sure. Thank you.